Hello, my name's Mark Tucker, and in this tutorial I'll be talking about the matte tool. Now the matte tool is a new feature in 4.3 which allows you to refine and improve upon your mattes. Now I've already set up a scene here and I've selected this shot which I want to work on. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring some colour back into our flesh tones there. So I've already added a layer 1 where I've changed the contrast just to bring out the colours a little bit. I've added a layer 2 with a hue angle to try and isolate down the flesh tones and work on her skin tones there. So I'm going to switch to layer matte mode because we're going to be mostly dealing with mattes. As you can see, the isolation's done quite well, but there's still some speckles in the background and still some holes in her forehead and around her mouth area. So what I'm going to try and do is use the matte tool to improve upon this matte. So I'm just going to add a matte tool. As you can see, the matte tool is applied very similarly to the blur. It also contains a blur as well as a number of other effects. You can also add and customize any number of other effects that you feel like. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to blur the image just to see how that improves it. Now you can see blurring the image has taken out a lot of the speckles in the background and softened down the image quite a lot. I mean, it's improved it, but we want to refine it a lot more. So what we're going to do is turn off the blur and switch to the matte curve. Now the matte curve is very similar to the curve grade in that you control the levels of the matte with a graph. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add an S curve just to help the matte a little bit. And now I'm going to try and threshold some of the colours down. So I'm going to threshold some of the darker greys back down to black and some of the lighter greys up to white. There is also a thresholding tool which I can use to do this, but I prefer the increased control of the matte curve. So I'm going to turn the blur back on and move it to the left so it's earlier on in the rendering pipeline. So as you can see, this has taken out a lot of the hair elements and really smoothed down the image, but it's not quite enough. So now I'm going to use the erode dilate to try and erode down some of the image before applying the blurs. So we're just going to erode down and take out a lot of the speckles in the background of the image. And as you can see, that's tidied up the image quite a lot, but actually eroded down some of the geometry. So let's re-add the blur and re-add the matte curve. And now you can see the matte has actually been reduced down a great deal, especially in her forehead area. So what I want to do is I want to use the new in-out blur to try and push out some of the colours and get some softness back into the image. So we're just going to increase the in-out blur up. And there you go, that's quite a nice isolation. Let's switch it back to the row cursor so we can have a look at the image. And then switch to the film grade and just increase the saturation just to bring some of the colour back into her skin tones. Add a little bit of contrast as well. Yeah, that's not too bad. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to show you the new sander tool. So I'm just going to add a sander and move it down towards the erode dilate because it's going to replace the erode dilate in the pipeline. So turn off the erode dilate and turn off all the other effects so we can actually see what we're doing and switch to layer matte mode. The sander is a despeckle dethreshold tool. So I'm going to input a search size of 2 pixels and move the despeckle threshold all the way up to 1. And as you can see, it's taken out a lot of the speckles in the background, but not quite enough. And I'll just flash it on and off to show you. So I'm going to increase the search size to 3. Yeah, that's helped a lot more. And next thing we're going to try and do is remove the holes in her skin. So we're going to move the dehold threshold up to 1 as well. As you can see, this has filled in a lot of the holes, a lot of the smaller holes around her face. Now I can use the color difference threshold to add a bit more noise back into the image, but I don't particularly want to do that at the moment. This is not really, I want a solid matte. So we're going to turn on the blur back on and turn the matte curve back on. Now as you can see, it hasn't actually eroded down the geometry as much, so I don't need to apply as much in-out blur. I just want a little bit of in-out blur just to get a little bit of color back into the image. And that's worked quite well. So we're going to switch back to row cursor. Now I've prepared 2 cursors, one at layer 1 and one at layer 2, so I can show you a compare. So let me just switch it to the wipe layout. So as you can see, the colour has only really come up through the flesh tones. None of the hair or the background has been affected. So what I showed you in this tutorial was how to use the matte tool to improve on a matte pulled by the hue angle by using a matte curve, a blur, an in-out blur, and the erode dilate or the sander.